In this video, we're going to be talking about ions. So ions are basically atoms with a charge. This could be either be a positive charge or a negative charge. It doesn't matter. These ions, they can be observed through three different ways. One is neutral, cation, and anion. First, let's start with neutral. Neutral is pretty self-explanatory. That means they have no charge. Let's just take oxygen. If we were to take oxygen, it has the same amount of electrons as there are protons, meaning that if it has 8 electrons, it must have 8 protons. So if it has 8 electrons and 8 protons, 8 electrons are negative and 8 protons are positive. So if we were to do this visually, we would get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And a positive and negative, they typically cancel with each other. So if we cancel all of these out, we get no charge at the end. And because we have no charge at the end, we end up with the oxygen atom here being neutral. Because of that, this regular oxygen, it is a neutral atom. Sometimes ions can have a tendency of gaining or losing electrons. So cations basically means that it has more protons than there are electrons, and anions means there's more electrons than there are protons. So let's look at lithium, for example. How do we know if it's going to be like either gaining or losing? Well, it's kind of simple. So lithium has a atomic number of 3, meaning 3 electrons and 3 protons. Lithium has 2 orbits, the first outer ring and the second outer ring. Because only 3 spots are filled, and in the second orbit, we know that the max amount of electrons you can hold in the second orbit is 8. But as you can see here, only 1 is filling it. And you know, an atom, it wants to stay stable. And because an atom wants to stay stable as fast as possible, it would rather lose 1 than having to gain 7. So in this case, if we were to just cut this electron, because like if the atom wants to be stable, right? So for it to be stable, we would cut 1 electron, meaning there's now, instead of having 3 positive now and 3 negative like this, now we have 3 positive but only 2 negative, meaning that this gets cut, this gets, yeah, these guys get canceled, but there's 1 over here remaining. And if there's only 1 positive, that means there's plus 1, or the only positive charge there is, hence the 1. And hence we would put lithium plus 1 to represent that there's 1 more proton than there is electron. Since it has 1 more proton than there are electrons, now that we canceled this one, we would do plus 1. This kind of ion is called a cation. So this is known as a cation, and that is because, as we said, cations contain more protons than there are electrons, and we just proved it right here. Now let's move on to anions. So let's take an example, oxygen, okay? So this is the first ring, and this is the second ring, okay? This one over here contains the protons and neutrons, and since oxygen has 8 protons and 8 electrons, that must mean that 2 is fit in the first circle and 6 would be filled up. Of the 8 spots that are available, 6 would fill up. So we would have 1 here, 1 here. So we have 8 spots total in the second ring, but because 2 is occupying the first one, that means that only 6 can occupy the second one. But this is in a better situation than our lithium over here. It only took 1 spot, but here the electrons were able to take 6 spots, leaving only 2 over here. If we were to think through common sense, is it better to lose 6 or gain 2? It's easier to gain 2. And because the atom is trying to stay as fast stable as possible, it'll most likely gain 2. And now we have 8 protons, right? But let's just say that we were to add 2 and we have 8 electrons, right? Now let's just say we add 2 more electrons. Add 2 more electrons. So now we would add 2 electrons, so now we get 10 electrons. So if we get 10 electrons and 8 protons, that basically means that there are more electrons than there are protons. And would you look at that? That matches with our definition, the anion. Anion means there are more electrons than there are protons. And seeing as there are more negative charges than there are the positive charges, we would put it as oxygen -2. And the reason why is since there are less protons than there are electrons and 2 less protons than there are electrons, we would put -2. So the charge here would be -2. This type of ion is called an anion. So let's look at one last example. Let's take carbon. So what is carbon's atomic number? Oh, it's 6. Okay, so if carbon's atomic number is 6, that means that first ring, second ring, so 2 would occupy the first ring. That means that 4 would occupy the second ring. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Of the 8 spots the second ring can fill, 4 is filled out. But wait, there's still 4 left. This is an even number. And there's even number of spots taken and even number of spots untaken. So is it considered an anion or a cation? Like, which one should it take? Should it add, like, should it gain 4 or should it lose 4? Well, in this example, the carbon, depending on the environment, can do whatever it wants actually. It can either gain 4, lose 4, so it can remain as a stable atom, or it can create a covalent bond with another element. We will go into what a covalent bond is in a future video. If it was to lose 4, then we would do carbon plus 4, but if it was to gain 4, we would do carbon minus 4. Okay, so this is for, I messed it up over here, but the arrows can probably help you. So for the C plus 4, there are 4 more protons than there are electrons. That basically means that we're removing these 4 electrons that are originally in the carbon atom. But for the anion, it's with the negative charge -4, and that's because we're adding 4 more electrons, and because there's a higher negative charge than there are positive charge, it would end up being in a negative charge because there's that much left over. So it would be -4 as the charge. One easy way to remember is cation would be would have more protons, so just expect it to have plus, and anion would have more negative, like more electrons, and since electrons are negatively charged, expect it to have a negative sign over here. Also over here, if you were to look, T could be symbolized as plus and N could be symbolized as negative, which connects to this over here. So in conclusion, basically we talked about what a neutral atom is, what a cation is, what an anion is, and what elements can be a cation or an anion. Cations are the ions which are positively charged, which have more protons than there are electrons. Anions have more electrons than there are protons, and some elements like carbon and silicon can actually go either way, meaning they can either be an anion or a cation. It doesn't matter how many kind of electron, the amount of number of electrons they have in their outer circle. Meanwhile, to determine what a anion is, basically if it has more electrons, like if it has more than 4 electrons, that means that it is able to become an anion because it is easier to replace these spots. And if it has less than 4, that means it is easier to just remove those electrons so the atom can be stable. So there would be more protons than the electrons that would just be removed, so that would be a cation. Also, an ion is a atom which has a charge, so an ion is a cation and an anion.